Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we venture into the frozen wilderness of Canada, where small towns harbor secrets darker than the longest winter night. 10 documented cases that defy explanation await you. These are not urban legends passed down through generations. These are real events that shattered communities and left investigators with more questions than answers. Disappearances that break the laws of physics. Crimes that remain unsolved decades later. Discoveries that forced authorities to reopen investigations they hoped would stay buried. Each story you are about to hear is backed by official records, witness testimony, and evidence that continues to haunt those who encountered it. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let's step into the isolated villages and forgotten towns of the Canadian wilderness, where help is hours away. And the truth is something far more terrifying than being alone. My name is Ethan Moore, and this happened when I was 27 years old, living alone in a small Canadian town called Red Creek, a place most people only pass through if they're lost or running low on gas. Red Creek had one diner, one gas station, and a silence that felt heavier at night, like the town itself was holding its breath. I moved there after my divorce, chasing cheap rent and quieter days. I told myself I needed space to heal. What I didn't realize was that Red Creek had too much space. Miles of forest pressing in from every direction, swallowing sound, swallowing light. The locals were polite but distant. Conversations never went past the weather. Whenever I asked about the abandoned houses on the edge of town, people changed the subject. The first week, the woman at the diner leaned closer and said, almost apologetically, "Just don't open your door after dark if you don't recognize the knock." I laughed it off. Small town superstition, every place had its ghost stories. My house sat at the very end of Birch Road, backed by thick woods. At night, the trees creaked like old bones, branches scratching the siding as if testing it. I started sleeping with the lights on, not because I was scared, but because the dark in Red Creek felt aware. The knocking started on my 4th night. 3 slow knocks, not loud, not urgent, just patient. I checked my phone. 2:17 a.m. I remember standing in the hallway, heart pounding, thinking the same stupid thought over and over. No one should be knocking this late, unless they already know you're awake. I didn't answer the door. That's what I tell myself now anyway. I stood there, frozen, staring at the handle like it might turn on its own. The knocking didn't come again. No footsteps, no car engine, just silence settling back into the house like it had been waiting. The next morning, I mentioned it at the diner. The room went quiet in that uncomfortable way people pretend not to notice. The same waitress who'd warned me earlier set down my coffee and said, "What time?" "After 2, I replied. She didn't ask anything else, just nodded once and walked away. That should have been my sign to leave. Instead, I stayed. Curiosity is a dangerous thing in towns like Red Creek. By nightfall, I'd convinced myself it was a prank, maybe a drunk, maybe someone lost. The second knock came 2 nights later. Same rhythm, 3 slow taps. This time, I was awake, sitting on the couch. I muted the TV and listened. I could hear breathing on the other side of the door, soft, controlled, like someone trying very hard not to be noticed. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. No answer. I checked the peephole. Nothing. Just darkness and the weak glow of my porch light. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were no footprints in the fresh snow. I backed away from the door, every instinct screaming at me to stay silent. After a long minute, I heard something slide across the wood, slow and deliberate. A fingernail, tracing the door frame. I barely slept that night. Every sound felt amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the house settling, the wind pushing against the walls. By morning, I was exhausted and jumpy, snapping at small things, convincing myself I was overreacting. Still, I called in sick to work and spent the day checking locks, windows, even the crawl space beneath the house. Everything was sealed. Nothing was disturbed. That afternoon, I met my neighbor Gordon, an older man who lived 2 houses down. He watched me from his porch as I brought in groceries, his eyes sharp and uneasy. When I mentioned the knocking, his face drained of color. "You didn't open it, did you?" he asked. When I shook my head, he exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for years. He told me that people used to hear knocking all the time in Red Creek, especially those who lived near the woods. Some answered, some didn't. The ones who didn't usually left town within a week. "And the ones who did?" I asked. Gordon looked past me, toward the tree line. "Their houses stayed," he said quietly. "They didn't." That night, I turned off every light and sat in the dark, listening. I told myself I'd face it this time, confront whatever was playing games with me. When the knocking came again at 2:17 a.m., my hands were shaking. But I didn't move. Something on the other side whispered my name. Hearing my name broke something inside me. I hadn't told anyone in town who I was. Not properly. I sat there, holding my breath, counting seconds like it might keep me grounded. The whisper came again, closer to the door, softer this time, almost familiar. "Ethan, I know you're there." I stood up before I realized what I was doing. Part of me needed to see it, to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. I moved slowly toward the door, every step heavy, like the air itself was resisting me. The peephole showed nothing again. No face, no movement, just the porch light flickering weakly. Then I noticed the smell. Damp earth, rotting leaves, the forest after rain. A memory surfaced. Hiking trips as a kid. The feeling of being watched deep in the woods. My hand hovered over the lock. The voice shifted, changing tone, becoming almost pleading. "Please," it said. "It's cold." I backed away, heart hammering. That's when the knocking changed. Faster, louder, angry. The door rattled in its frame as something leaned against it from the outside, its weight unnatural, uneven. I screamed for it to stop, my voice cracking with fear. Silence followed. When I finally looked outside at dawn, I found deep scratches carved into the wood, too long, too deep to be human. I didn't go to work after that. I didn't leave the house at all. I spent the day sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the door, replaying the voice in my head. It hadn't sounded monstrous. That was the worst part. It sounded human, familiar in a way I couldn't place, like someone I'd known long ago. By evening, the town felt different, quieter than usual. When I looked out the window, I noticed lights turning off one by one, as if the entire street was preparing for something. Gordon's house went dark early. The diner across town closed before sunset. Red Creek was bracing itself. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. "Unknown number, do not answer tonight." My chest tightened. I typed back, asking who it was. The message went unread. At 2:16 a.m., I heard footsteps on the porch, slow, heavy, each step deliberate, like it wanted me to count them. The smell of wet soil crept in again, seeping through the cracks in the door. This time, the knocking didn't wait. 3 sharp raps echoed through the house, then another 3, then another. "You're being rude," the voice said calmly. I stood outside Gordon's door for 6 winters. He never let me in. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. My mind raced, piecing together things I didn't want to understand. "You should be grateful," it continued. "I chose you. I don't remember deciding to leave." I was just suddenly stuffing clothes into a bag, hands moving on instinct. Whatever was outside wasn't a prank, wasn't a person, and it wasn't going away. Red Creek didn't scare it. It belonged to it. The knocking stopped as soon as I grabbed my keys. That silence was worse. I opened the door just enough to look out. The porch was empty. No footprints, no sign of anyone. The forest stood still, branches unmoving, as if frozen mid-breath. I stepped outside. The cold hit me hard, but it wasn't winter cold. It was deeper, like the air had been pulled straight from underground. As I reached my car, I felt something watching from the tree line, not moving, just waiting. Then I heard it behind me, breathing, close, too close. I turned around and saw a shape where my door had been. Tall, wrongly shaped, its outline blurred like it couldn't decide what it was supposed to look like. Its face, if it had one, was hidden in shadow, but I recognized the voice when it spoke. "See?" it said gently. "You came to me after all." The porch light flickered violently. For a split second, I saw its hand, long fingers ending in black, cracked nails, reaching toward my shoulder. I ran. I don't remember getting in the car. I don't remember starting it. I only remember the sound of something slamming against the trunk as I sped down Birch Road, the forest closing in behind me. I didn't stop driving until the road disappeared beneath my headlights and turned into a blur of snow and asphalt. Red Creek fell away behind me, swallowed by the trees, but the feeling of being followed stayed lodged in my chest. Every time I checked the rearview mirror, I expected to see something standing in the road, calmly watching me leave. I made it to the highway just before dawn. The sky was turning a sickly gray, and my hands were numb from gripping the steering wheel too hard. I pulled over at the first rest stop and threw up beside my car, my body finally catching up to the terror. That's where I saw it. On the back of my car, pressed into the frost on the trunk, were handprints. Too large. Fingers too long. The marks looked burned into the ice rather than smudged, as if the cold itself had reacted to its touch. I scraped them away with my sleeve, my heart racing, and checked under the car, inside the back seat, everywhere. Nothing. When my phone finally regained signal, I had 3 missed calls, all from Gordon. I listened to the voicemail with shaking hands. "Ethan," he whispered. "If you're hearing this, you left. That's good. Just don't ever come back. It doesn't like to be abandoned." The line went dead, followed by a sound I still hear in my dreams. 3 slow knocks. I thought leaving would end it. That once I crossed a certain distance, Red Creek would release its grip on me. I was wrong. The first knock in my new apartment came a month later. Different door, different city, same rhythm. 3 slow taps, patient and familiar. I stood in my hallway, staring at a door I hadn't even finished unpacking behind. The smell came with it. Damp soil and rotting leaves, filling the air like a memory forcing its way back to the surface. I didn't answer. I never answered. Since then, I've moved 6 times. Different provinces, different buildings. It doesn't matter. Sometimes the knocking comes at night, sometimes during the day. Always when I'm alone. It never gets angry anymore. It doesn't need to. Sometimes it just stands there and whispers apologies. Other times it thanks me for listening through the door. Once, it told me Gordon finally opened his. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if it ever plans to come in. All I know is this. Red Creek wasn't the source. It was the warning. And if you ever hear 3 slow knocks from someone you don't recognize, don't answer. Because once it knows your name, it never forgets. I started researching Red Creek after that. Not online. There was almost nothing there. But through archives, old newspapers, and library microfilm in towns that barely remembered it existed. Patterns emerged slowly, like something surfacing through murky water. Every few years, someone vanished, always quietly. No struggle, no bodies. Just an empty house and a door left slightly ajar. The reports always mentioned neighbors hearing knocking in the days leading up to it. Some articles called it coincidence. Others didn't comment at all. One name kept appearing in older records. A settler, a trapper, a man who froze to death outside his own home more than a century ago. According to one account, he was found standing upright on the porch, knuckles bloody, face twisted in terror. The door had been locked from the inside. His family had listened to him knock all night. They never opened it. After that, the town changed. People learned rules they didn't write down. Doors stayed closed. Questions stayed unasked. Red Creek survived by pretending it didn't hear anything. That night, as I sat surrounded by old papers, the knocking came again. Louder this time. Closer. The voice didn't plead or threaten. It sounded tired. I stood outside so long, it said softly, "I just want to be warm." For the first time, I felt something worse than fear. I felt guilt. Last winter, the knocking stopped. Weeks passed, then months. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. I let myself believe it had moved on, found someone else, or finally given up. Then I noticed the cold. Not outside, but inside my apartment. No matter how high I turned the heat, certain rooms stayed freezing. My breath fogged in the hallway. Frost crept along the base of the door from the inside. One night, I woke up standing in front of it. My hand was on the lock. I don't remember getting out of bed. The voice was there, closer than ever, no longer muffled by wood. "You don't have to be alone anymore," it whispered. "You understand me now." That's when I realized the truth. It doesn't chase you. It waits until you're ready to open the door yourself. I don't know how long I stood there before I screamed and backed away. I broke the lock the next morning, barricaded the door, moved again. But the cold followed. And sometimes, late at night when everything is quiet, I feel knuckles pressing gently against my chest. 3 slow taps from the inside, reminding me that one day I'll answer. Because everyone does. My name is Lucas Bennett, and this happened when I was 32, living in a quiet Canadian town called Hollow Lake, the kind of place built around water and secrets. Tourists came in summer for fishing and sunsets. Locals stayed year-round because they didn't know how to leave. I worked as a night maintenance supervisor for the lakeside cabins. It was an easy job on paper, checking generators, locking empty rentals, making sure drunk tourists didn't wander into the woods. What no one mentioned was how deep Hollow Lake really was, or how the locals avoided talking about what lay beneath it. There was a rule everyone followed without questioning it. Never swim after dark, never boat after midnight, and never follow the lights. I heard that last one my first week from an old fisherman named Roy. He said it casually, like he was reminding me to lock my car. When I asked what lights he meant, he just stared at the water and said, "Oh, the ones that pretend to be stars." I laughed. I shouldn't have. The first time I saw them, it was just past midnight. I was walking the dock, flashlight in hand, when something glowed beneath the surface of the lake. Soft, pale, moving slowly like it was breathing. At first, I thought it was a reflection. Then it blinked, and I realized the light wasn't coming from the water. It was coming up to meet me. I froze on the dock, my heart hammering. The glow beneath the lake pulsed rhythmically, almost like it was alive, following a slow, deliberate beat. I could hear nothing. No wind, no water lapping. Nothing except the faint hum of the lights. My instinct screamed at me to run, but curiosity held me in place. The water was black, opaque under the dim moonlight. Whatever was down there, it was massive. Shadows moved beneath the glow, swirling like ink, and I could swear I saw shapes resembling faces pressed against the surface, staring up at me with eyes that reflected the light. I blinked, and they vanished. I stumbled back toward the cabin, slipping on the wet dock boards. My phone buzzed in my pocket, though I hadn't received signal here in months. A single text. "Don't look back." I turned. Nothing. Just the faint glimmer beneath the water, still pulsing, hypnotic. I wanted to tell myself it was algae or bioluminescent fish, but nothing in my experience glowed like that. Nothing moved with such precision and intent. I spent the rest of the night trying to sleep, but every time my eyes closed, I saw the lights moving closer to the shore. At one point, I heard faint whispers in my dreams, calling my name from beneath the water. Something wanted me to come closer, wanted me in the lake. By sunrise, the glow was gone. The water looked calm, innocent, like nothing had ever stirred. But I knew better. Hollow Lake wasn't quiet. It was waiting. That summer, I started asking locals about the lake, casually, trying not to sound paranoid. Most gave me vague answers, shrugged, or changed the topic. Only Roy, the fisherman, spoke plainly. "They've always been there," he said one evening as we repaired a dock. "The lights, the things beneath, people call them ghosts, spirits, whatever. But they're old, older than the town. They wait. Sometimes they call, sometimes they don't." I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the chill creeping up my spine. Wait for what? Roy stared at the water, his eyes dark. "For someone who will listen." That night, curiosity got the better of me. I took my small motorboat out past the main dock, far from shore, hoping to see the lights up close. The lake was calm, deceptively still. Then the glow appeared, far below the boat, brighter this time, moving slowly in circular patterns. My stomach knotted as I realized the lights were forming shapes, elongated forms that resembled twisted human figures swimming just beneath the surface. I reached for my flashlight, but it flickered and died. A whisper rose from the lake, low and melodic, carrying words I couldn't understand but felt deep in my bones. The water rippled violently, like something massive had shifted. My hands trembled on the oars as fear rooted me in place. I tried to leave. The boat wouldn't move. The water beneath it churned as if holding me there, waiting, urging me closer to whatever lurked below. Panic set in. My oars were stuck, as if the lake itself had frozen them in place. The glowing forms swirled beneath me, circling the boat slowly, drawing closer. I could hear the whispers more clearly now, melodic but urgent, compelling me to lean over the edge, to look into the depths. My reflection on the water's surface twisted into something alien, as if the lake had a mind of its own, reshaping reality. Then one of the lights shot upward, in a vertical streak, piercing the boat's hull of darkness, illuminating a face in the water that I will never forget. Pale, distorted, hollow eyes staring right at me, mouth opening in a silent scream. I jerked back violently, hitting my head on the side of the boat. Stars danced in front of my eyes, and I felt a weight pressing down on my chest. My instincts screamed to row, but my arms refused to obey. Suddenly, the water erupted, not violently, but with a graceful, fluid motion. A hand, enormous and webbed, reached above the surface, just short of grabbing me. The whispering ceased, replaced by a low, guttural hum that vibrated through my bones. The figure disappeared below, as if swallowed by the water. For a heartbeat, the lake was calm again, but I knew better. The lights had not gone. They had only waited. I fled back to the shore, chest heaving, knees weak, never glancing back. Something had tried to call me beneath Hollow Lake, and it would try again. After that night, I couldn't bring myself to leave the cabin after dark. I told myself it was fear, that rationally the lake was harmless. But every time the sun set, I felt the pull. The lake calling, beckoning, whispering my name in a voice both beautiful and cruel. Sleep became impossible. I dreamed of hands reaching up from the depths, dragging me into black water that smelled of decay and old secrets. Roy noticed my obsession and warned me again. "The lights don't forgive curiosity," he said as we repaired the fishing nets one morning. "Once they know you can see them, they'll come back, and they'll be clever." I ignored him. I wanted answers. I needed to know what was down there. 2 nights later, I went out again, alone, walking along the dock under a new moon. The lake was a mirror, pitch black, reflecting nothing. Then, the lights appeared. Dozens of them, dancing beneath the surface, moving with a fluid grace I could not comprehend. Shapes emerged, elongated, human-like forms, some transparent, some glowing with unnatural brightness. They circled the dock, closer than before, leaving ripples across the water. Then one of them rose slowly, water dripping from a pale, twisted face. Its lips moved silently, forming words I could not hear, but somehow understood. "Come down. Join us. Forever." My knees buckled. I fell backward, hitting the wood and scrambled to the cabin, leaving everything behind. I knew at that moment the lake had claimed a part of me, a seed of something that would never let me go. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had been a hallucination, stress, isolation, too much work. But the evidence was undeniable. The water at the shore had frost-like patches, not from the cold, but shaped like footprints and handprints pressed into the mud, too perfect, too intentional. And in my cabin, faint scratches appeared along the wooden floorboards, like nails dragging lightly across the wood. No one else had been there. I asked around discreetly. Old locals, fishermen, and even the diner owner all looked at me strangely. One man, his eyes darting toward the lake, muttered under his breath, "They choose who sees them. Once you do, there's no undoing it." I pressed for more, but he shook his head. "You don't want to know." By nightfall, the lights returned, not waiting for me to look. They were closer now, under the cabin itself, glimmering faintly beneath the stilts that held it above the water. I felt vibrations through the wooden floor, a subtle humming that resonated through my bones. It was as if the lake itself was breathing. Something was moving beneath, circling, studying, patient. I sat in a corner of the cabin, clutching a flashlight that flickered nervously. The lights pulsed in response to my movements, faster when I moved, slower when I froze. And then, for the first time, I saw a single figure rise completely above the water. Its long limbs hung like a corpse, and the face was pale and hollow. The eyes met mine directly. Then it smiled. I screamed and ran outside, the lake's surface breaking violently as if trying to pull me back in. I didn't sleep for the next 3 nights. I stayed awake, watching the lake from the cabin's windows, fearing that even a second of rest would allow the lights to take me. I couldn't leave. Not entirely. Every time I thought about packing my things, the lake seemed to pull tighter, tugging at my mind, whispering promises I couldn't understand, yet somehow wanted to obey. One evening, I noticed the lights forming patterns beneath the water, long, sinuous shapes weaving in and out of each other. They were no longer random. It was deliberate. A message? A warning? I couldn't tell. But something about their rhythm resonated with my heartbeat. I realized then that the lake was intelligent, conscious, patient beyond comprehension. The whispers came back that night, louder, clearer. "You can join us. Forever isn't long." The voice was melodic, hypnotic. I tried to resist, bolting to the cabin door only to feel the floor vibrate beneath me. A wave of cold air hit my face as if the lake itself exhaled. The water near the shore churned violently, the lights flickering rapidly, forming shapes that resembled people, both human and not. They beckoned me. I could feel their desire, their hunger, but not in a way that was violent. It was more inviting. I stumbled backward, falling against the wall. For the first time, I realized I wasn't afraid in a traditional sense. I was entranced, and part of me wanted to obey. The following night, I tried to stay grounded. I told myself to ignore the lake, to focus on the practical, checking locks, lights, and my belongings. But as midnight approached, I heard a faint humming, unlike anything I had heard before. It was coming from beneath the cabin, vibrating through the floorboards. The lights emerged again, brighter this time, piercing the black water, reflecting off my terrified face in the window. Something moved differently now. One of the figures rose above the water, and I could see its body fully for the first time. It had elongated limbs, pale, translucent skin, and eyes that glowed like lanterns. Its face tilted toward me, expression unchanging, calm, almost expectant. Then it gestured, one long arm pointing toward the lake, urging me to step out. I felt paralyzed, caught between the terror of leaving and the impossibility of staying. I reached for my phone to call Roy, but it slipped from my hands into the water with a small splash. The lights flickered in response, as if amused. The whispers surrounded me, echoing through the night, speaking words I could not translate but instinctively understood. Join us. Become one of us. See everything beneath. I stumbled backward, tripping over the cabin steps, my body moving before my mind could react. I realized, with a cold certainty, that the lake had waited for me all along, and now it would not let me go. I knew I had to leave Hollow Lake. I packed everything I could carry, clothes, my laptop, essential papers. Everything else was left behind. I didn't dare look back as I loaded my car, but the lake was impossible to ignore. Its surface shimmered unnaturally in the moonlight, glowing faintly from the lights beneath. The whispering began again, soft and persistent, carrying through the air like the movement of water itself. I started driving, the road empty and silent. The town faded behind me, the trees closing in like dark curtains. But even as I put miles between myself and the lake, I felt it following me. My phone buzzed with a text. "You can never leave." My hands tightened on the steering wheel, heart hammering. I looked in the rearview mirror. For a split second, I thought I saw pale shapes rising from the lake behind me. but it was gone before I could blink. Weeks passed. I moved to a city far from the lake, hoping to bury the memory. But Hollow Lake didn't release me. Every night, I dreamt of the water, glowing lights and hands reaching up, waiting patiently. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I swear I can hear the soft lapping of water against my bedroom walls. It is patient, it is intelligent, and it is waiting for me to return, calling me back to the depths I should have never approached. I have learned to live with it. I avoid lakes entirely now, even in daylight. Streams, rivers, ponds, anything that might harbor what waits beneath Hollow Lake's surface. But sometimes, when the air is still and the night is quiet, I feel a pull in my chest, a whisper in my mind that calls me back. The final time I saw the lights, it was in a dream. I was standing on the dock, but the water was blacker than ever, glowing shapes pulsing beneath. The forms rose, surrounding me, circling closer, but there was no fear, only an inexplicable sense of homecoming. One figure reached out its hand, pale and translucent, fingers elongated, beckoning me into the water. I tried to resist, but my body moved on its own. I woke in a cold sweat, gasping, yet with the sense that the lake had claimed a part of me, deep in my soul. Hollow Lake is not just water and trees. It is ancient, alive, patient, and it remembers. Those lights beneath the surface are not a trick of the imagination. They are sentient. They are waiting. And someday, if I am careless, I will return to the depths. Not by choice, but because the lake will decide I am ready. I never speak of it. Few would understand, and fewer would believe. But if you ever see lights beneath a lake in the dead of night, know this: they are waiting, and they do not forgive curiosity. My name is Sarah Whitman, and this happened when I was 27, working as a delivery driver in a small town called Blackwood. Most people had lived there their entire lives. Everyone knew everyone, or at least they thought they did. It was a quiet, rainy evening when I first noticed something strange about Blackwood Road, a narrow stretch lined with old pine trees that twisted in unnatural ways. I had been driving home from a delivery, headlights cutting through the thick fog. Up ahead, the road seemed to stretch longer than it should, twisting and bending in ways that defied the map. Then I saw a figure, tall, thin, and impossibly still, standing by the roadside. I slowed down, thinking it was a hitchhiker, but as I approached, the figure vanished. My heart raced, and I double-checked the rearview mirror. Nothing. That's when I noticed the signs. Houses I knew should have been on either side of the road were gone. Trees that had been sparse suddenly loomed in impossible clusters. The fog thickened. The air smelled like wet soil and decayed leaves. I called dispatch, trying to get directions, but the radio crackled, then went dead. My phone had no signal. And for the first time, I realized that Blackwood Road was no longer just a street. It was something alive, twisting around me, keeping me inside a world I did not recognize. I tried retracing my route, hoping to find the familiar turns and landmarks. But Blackwood Road had changed. Every tree seemed taller, closer, bending unnaturally toward the car, casting long shadows that swallowed my headlights. I pressed harder on the accelerator, but the fog thickened with each meter, wrapping the road in a suffocating shroud. That's when I noticed the sounds. Not wind, not rain, but faint whispers drifting from the forest on either side. Words I couldn't comprehend, yet somehow I felt them burrowing into my mind. They spoke of being watched, of trespassing into a place where no one should tread. I tried to focus on driving, eyes fixed on the asphalt, but the road shifted beneath me. A curve I remembered was gone, replaced by a stretch that shouldn't exist. My rearview mirror caught a flash, a shadow moving in perfect synchronicity with my car. It wasn't human, yet it mirrored my movements. Panic seized me, and I swerved to avoid it, only to realize the road had split. Two identical paths stretched ahead, both disappearing into fog, neither leading home. I was trapped. Blackwood Road had no exits tonight. It had absorbed me into its twisted geography, and the longer I drove, the more I felt it watching, studying, deciding how it would consume me. I gripped the wheel, praying for the dawn that seemed impossibly distant. The fog grew thicker as I drove, wrapping the car in a suffocating embrace. Every turn felt wrong, like the road was bending against me. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, disappearing when I tried to focus on them. I realized I could no longer trust my memory. Every landmark I knew had been replaced by endless rows of twisted pines. Then I saw the signs, old wooden mailboxes, tilted and rotting. They bore names I didn't recognize. Houses I had delivered to for months were gone, replaced by structures I had never seen before. Each one seemed abandoned, yet the windows reflected movement, shadows moving inside. My heart pounded. Blackwood Road wasn't just a road. It was a living, breathing entity, reshaping itself, swallowing everything familiar, trapping anyone foolish enough to drive it at night. Suddenly, I glimpsed something in the distance, a faint light between the trees, like a lantern swinging in the fog. Relief surged. Someone, anyone. But as I approached, the light vanished. A cold wind hit the car, carrying a scent of wet earth and decayed wood. The whispers grew louder, circling me, calling my name. The road ahead twisted sharply, leading me into darkness I didn't remember existing. I realized then that escaping might be impossible. The road wanted me here. It was patient, waiting for me to understand that I had become part of its story. Panic set in fully as I drove further. Every instinct screamed that I was being watched, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the road itself was alive, observing me through every curve, every shadow. The whispers grew more coherent now, forming half-words I could almost understand, like fragments of a language older than the town itself. Suddenly, a figure appeared directly in front of the car. I slammed on the brakes, but it didn't move like a human. It hovered, elongated limbs stretching impossibly, eyes hollow and black, its mouth opening to whisper a soundless scream. The fog warped around it, bending the headlights and casting grotesque shadows. I swerved to the side, crashing into a ditch. The car rocked violently, and I felt hands, cold, wet and almost translucent, pressing against the doors from the outside. I could hear them whispering my name, inviting me to step out, to leave the safety of the car and become one with Blackwood Road. Frantically, I started the engine again, tires spinning in the mud. The road ahead curved unnaturally, twisting in impossible angles. The figure disappeared, replaced by shadows that followed every movement of the car, circling me, confining me. My phone buzzed with a single message, on no signal. "You belong here now." I screamed, gripping the wheel, realizing with horror that escape wasn't just difficult, it might be impossible. By the 5th hour of driving, exhaustion had set in, but I couldn't stop. Every time I slowed, the whispers intensified, flowing through the car like a living current. I realized the road had a rhythm, a pulse of its own. Every curve, every shadow was deliberate, orchestrated to disorient and trap me. I tried calling for help again. No signal. The radio crackled, spewing static and faint distorted voices that weren't human. Panic tightened its grip on me. I noticed the trees forming unnatural patterns, leaning closer, almost like they were reaching for the car. Shadows flickered between them, too fast to be natural, yet moving with intention. The road was no longer just a stretch of asphalt. It was alive, aware, testing me. Then I saw it. An old abandoned house, one I recognized from deliveries months ago. But it wasn't abandoned. Curtains twitched. A figure appeared in the upstairs window, tall, thin, and unnaturally still. Its head turned slowly, meeting my gaze. The whispers became a low hum, vibrating through the metal of the car. My stomach churned as I realized the figure was no longer in the window when I blinked. It was standing at the edge of the road ahead, as if the house itself had produced it. The car skidded slightly as I hit the brakes, and I understood with a sinking horror that Blackwood Road wasn't content to just confuse me. It wanted me to see, to fear, to become part of it. Desperation clawed at me. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles bled, my eyes darting from side to side. The road twisted impossibly ahead, like a serpent writhing in fog. I felt the presence of countless shadows moving just beyond my vision, circling the car, watching, waiting. Every instinct screamed to run, yet there was nowhere to go. Blackwood Road had me. I passed a small clearing and glimpsed something in the fog. A circle of figures standing perfectly still, motionless as statues. They weren't human. Their limbs were elongated, bodies distorted, faces pale and expressionless. They turned toward me in unison, and the whispers coalesced into a single, haunting chant, repeating my name over and over. The road beneath the car seemed to pulse, guiding me toward them. I slammed on the brakes again, but the car wouldn't stop. Tires skidded over wet leaves and mud, the vehicle moving as if on its own. One figure emerged from the mist, gliding smoothly across the road, unbound by gravity or speed. Its eyes locked onto mine. My chest tightened. The whispers urged me forward, promising release if I obeyed. But I couldn't. With a scream, I veered sharply into the ditch, the car splintering branches and scraping rocks. The figure didn't stop. The road itself seemed to shift, opening paths I didn't recognize, closing exits I had counted on. It was alive. It had claimed me, inch by inch, guiding me into its heart. By the 7th hour, my mind was fraying. The road no longer made sense. Each turn I remembered was gone, replaced by new paths that seemed to twist unnaturally into the fog. Shadows darted at the edges of my vision, and whispers now spoke in complete sentences, taunting me, mocking me, repeating everything I feared about myself. I realized I wasn't just trapped physically, I was trapped mentally. Blackwood Road was not merely asphalt and trees. It was intent, alive, feeding on fear. A figure appeared in the distance, tall and thin, its body shifting unnaturally, as though it were being stretched by invisible hands. It moved closer, gliding rather than walking. I tried to accelerate, but the car obeyed only half of my commands, jerking forward in fits and starts. The figure kept pace, unhurried, patient, its head tilting to observe me with hollow, dark eyes. Then I saw more. From the fog, dozens of shapes emerged, each one twisted, grotesque, yet eerily human. They formed a loose circle around the car, moving in perfect synchronization. My chest tightened. The whispers became deafening, repeating my name with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I understood then that the road wanted me to accept it, to submit. It was not just a trap, it was a test. And every instinct told me that failure would not allow me to leave. I tried everything to escape. I swerved violently, forcing the car down side paths that shouldn't exist, praying for a familiar landmark, a break in the fog, anything. But the road twisted beneath me like a living thing, closing exits, opening new, impossible turns. The figures moved effortlessly, gliding through trees and shadows, always at the edges of my perception. Then I glimpsed movement to my left. A figure standing atop a hill, bathed in pale fog. Its arms stretched impossibly long, pointing at me. I felt compelled to obey, to follow its gesture, though every instinct screamed not to. My hands shook on the wheel, eyes flicking between the figures ahead and the one on the hill. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. Silence crashed over me like a physical blow. The absence of sound was worse than the noise, as if the road itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. My heart pounded in my ears, adrenaline surging. I knew the moment of choice had arrived. The road had presented me with an option, but one wrong move, one hesitation, and I would never leave Blackwood Road alive. With a shuddering inhale, I gripped the wheel tighter and forced the car forward, hoping the road's patience had limits, praying it would allow me to escape the living nightmare it had become. I saw it first as a flicker, a light in the distance, faint, almost like a star fallen into the fog. My heart surged. Could it be the town? Could it be the end of Blackwood Road's nightmare? I pushed the car forward, praying that the figures would retreat. But the road had other plans. Shadows danced around the headlights, moving faster than the car, keeping pace no matter how fast I drove. The flicker grew brighter. I realized it wasn't a light from the town. It was a lantern, held by a figure standing in the middle of the road. Tall, thin, with hollow black eyes, it didn't move aside. I swerved violently, tires spinning in wet mud, but the figure didn't budge. My scream echoed through the fog, swallowed instantly by the oppressive silence. Then I understood. The figure wasn't an obstacle. It was a guide, but not a friendly one. The road itself seemed to shift with it, paths rearranging, new shadows emerging. I had to follow, or risk vanishing completely. My pulse hammered in my ears as I forced the car forward, obeying some instinctual command I didn't want to obey, but couldn't resist. The whispers returned, gentler this time, almost coaxing me, reminding me that escape was possible, if I followed exactly. Every nerve in my body screamed that I was being led, not by a person, but by Blackwood Road itself, alive, intelligent, and utterly patient. I didn't know what awaited me, but I had no choice. When the first rays of dawn broke through the fog, the road began to shift again, softening its malevolence. The figures receded into the trees, watching silently, almost like children observing a lesson. The lantern figure stepped aside, allowing me to pass. My hands shook violently on the steering wheel, eyes scanning the landscape for anything familiar. And then, finally, I saw it, the exit. Blackwood Road twisted one last time, revealing the familiar curve leading back into town. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. I drove straight into the town limits, heart hammering, mind numb with relief and lingering fear. When I finally parked in my driveway, the whispers ceased. The fog lifted, and the road seemed ordinary once again, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Blackwood Road had marked me. It had tested me, studied me, and let me go only because it had determined I could survive its maze. I never took that road again at night. I warn others who live in Blackwood to avoid it after dark. The road is patient, alive, and it remembers every traveler who dares to drive it. I can still hear it sometimes, in the quiet hours, calling me by name. The figures, the shadows, the whispers, they are never far away. and Blackwood Road waits for the next soul foolish enough to wander into its twisted embrace. My name is David Mercer, and this happened when I was 32, working as a historical researcher specializing in abandoned estates. I had traveled across Canada documenting old homes, but nothing prepared me for Grove Manor, an imposing Victorian-era mansion tucked away in the outskirts of a sleepy town. The locals rarely spoke of it, and when they did, their voices dropped, eyes darting nervously. I arrived on a gray autumn afternoon, the wind rattling the ancient windows. The manor loomed over me like a living sentinel, its walls darkened by decades of neglect. Ivy crawled across the stonework, and the heavy front doors creaked ominously as I pushed them open. A chill swept past me, as if the house itself had exhaled after decades of silence. I stepped inside, flashlight cutting through layers of dust and cobwebs. The air smelled of mildew and decay, yet beneath it was something else, a metallic tang I couldn't place. I had barely taken 10 steps when I noticed the portraits lining the hallway, faces staring with lifelike intensity, eyes that seemed to follow me as I moved. Then came the whispers, soft and insistent, echoing from the upper floors. I froze. There was no one else in the house, at least no one visible. My rational mind tried to dismiss it as the wind, but deep down, I knew that Grove Manor was alive in a way I couldn't explain, and it had been waiting for me. The whispers grew louder as I ascended the grand staircase. Each step creaked under my weight, echoing through the cavernous halls. The air grew colder with every floor, my breath visible in front of me. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind funneling through broken windows, but the sound of soft footsteps behind me made my stomach twist with fear. I reached the second floor and noticed a room at the far end of the corridor. Its door was slightly ajar, and faint candlelight flickered inside, though I hadn't seen any candles in the house yet. Curiosity and dread warred within me. I approached slowly, my flashlight trembling in my hand. Inside, the room was furnished with antique furniture, untouched by time yet covered in dust. A large mirror dominated the far wall, its surface strangely clear, reflecting the room perfectly. But then I saw it. A shadow in the mirror that did not match my movements. It lingered behind me, tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce my soul. I spun around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. The whispers intensified, surrounding me, forming words I couldn't comprehend, yet understood instinctively. Leave, or stay forever. I stumbled back, almost knocking over a chair. Grove Manor was no ordinary abandoned mansion. It was a trap, a living entity, and I had unknowingly crossed its threshold. Something had marked me the moment I stepped inside. I tried to leave the room, but the door slammed shut on its own, sending a jolt of panic through me. I pounded on it, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers became louder, swirling around my head, urging me to turn back. My flashlight flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls, shadows that moved independently, stretching and contorting into grotesque shapes. Then I noticed the portraits on the walls of the hallway outside the room. Their eyes had changed. Faces that had once been neutral now stared at me with rage and sorrow, mouths slightly open as if they were silently screaming. The air grew thick, making it difficult to breathe. I felt as though unseen hands were brushing against my shoulders, guiding me or pushing me toward the center of the room. A chill ran down my spine as I saw movement in the mirror again. The shadow had stepped forward, no longer behind me, but standing within the glass itself. Its hollow eyes fixed on me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of recognition, as if it had been waiting specifically for me. I backed away, tripping over the antique furniture, realizing that Maple Grove Manor wasn't just haunted, it was conscious, sentient, and it had intentions. The room seemed to pulse with energy, and I understood with a shiver that this house didn't want visitors. It wanted souls. I found myself backing toward the window, desperate for an escape, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers intensified, now forming half-words I could almost comprehend. Stay. Forever. Ours. A cold wind blew through the room, scattering papers and flickering the candlelight on the desk. I tried to cover my ears, but the sound penetrated my mind, weaving fear directly into my thoughts. Suddenly, I saw movement behind the mirror. A figure stepped out, or perhaps it had been there all along, hiding in plain sight. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, veins dark beneath the surface. Its face was expressionless, but its eyes were alive, burning with a silent hunger. I felt paralyzed, unable to move, unable to breathe. Time itself seemed to stretch, the house holding me in a suspended nightmare. Desperate, I lunged for the corner of the room, smashing a chair against the mirror. The glass didn't shatter. Instead, ripples spread across its surface like water, distorting the reflection, revealing multiple shadowy figures waiting behind me. They were everywhere, silent and patient, their hollow eyes fixed on my soul. I screamed, a sound that seemed to vanish into the walls, unheard by anyone outside. Maple Grove Manor wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it had claimed me as its next story. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The figures in the mirror advanced slowly, not rushing, as if savoring my fear. The room seemed to stretch unnaturally, walls bending slightly, elongating the shadows. I realized I was no longer in control. Maple Grove Manor had taken over the space around me, reshaping it, bending reality to its will. Then I heard a soft laugh, chilling and childlike, echoing from the corners of the room. I spun toward the sound, but the source was impossible to locate. My mind screamed to run, to escape, but there was no exit. The door remained sealed, the windows unyielding. Even the floor seemed to pulse beneath my feet, like the heartbeat of the house itself. Desperate, I grabbed a candelabra and swung it at the mirror, the flames catching on the surface. The shadow figures recoiled, but the ripple in the glass persisted. They weren't contained within the reflection. They were aware, sentient, reacting to my every move. And then I felt it, a cold hand on my shoulder. I whipped around, but nothing was there. The whispers returned, louder than ever, chanting my name, weaving fear directly into my thoughts. I understood with absolute clarity that Maple Grove Manor didn't want me to leave. It wanted me to belong to it, to become another shadow in its walls, another soul trapped behind its mirrors forever. I forced myself to move, stumbling toward the corner of the room, eyes darting for any escape. The air was thick, suffocating, each breath a struggle. The mirror's surface shimmered, reflecting not just my image, but glimpses of previous visitors, frozen in horror, eyes wide, mouths silent. I realized then that I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last. Maple Grove Manor had claimed countless souls before me, feeding off their terror, storing it behind its walls. Suddenly, a door appeared to my right that hadn't been there before. My hand shook as I approached it. The whispers shifted tone, almost pleading, warning me not to enter. But instinct screamed that it was my only chance. I yanked the handle, pushing the door open, revealing a narrow hallway lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow me with renewed intensity. Each frame told a story of fear, agony, and resignation. As I walked down the hall, the floorboards creaked under my weight, echoing unnaturally loud. Shadows writhed along the walls, moving in impossible ways, stretching and curling toward me. The candlelight flickered violently, and for a moment, I saw a figure in the doorway at the far end. It raised an arm, beckoning me forward, but its smile was wrong. Too wide, unnatural. I swallowed my fear and stepped forward, knowing that Maple Grove Manor was aware of every movement I made. The house didn't just observe, it guided, it controlled, it decided who would survive and who would join its collection forever. By the seventh part of my ordeal, exhaustion and fear had fused into a heavy weight pressing against my chest. Every step I took down the narrow hallway felt preordained, as if the house was dictating my path. The portraits lining the walls seemed to shift subtly with each glance, their expressions more anguished, more alive. I felt eyes following me from every corner, and the whispers now formed coherent sentences, warning me, taunting me, beckoning me to surrender. Ahead, the hallway opened into a grand sitting room I hadn't seen before. The ceiling was impossibly high, and the fireplace was cold and black, though faint embers glowed as if the house itself exhaled. Shadows twisted across the walls, taking humanoid forms, gesturing, moving with impossible grace. A faint smell of decay, mixed with old wood, filled the room, pressing into my lungs with every breath. And then I saw it, a figure perched on the edge of a dusty armchair. It was a woman, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of reality. She tilted her head, as if studying me, assessing whether I would survive or be added to the house's collection. The whispers crescendoed, filling my mind with memories that weren't mine, fears that weren't mine, yet felt intimately personal. I realized then that Maple Grove Manor was not just haunted, it was alive, conscious, and capable of shaping the minds of those trapped within it. Escape was no longer merely a matter of physical movement. It was a test of will. I forced myself to move forward, each step feeling like wading through invisible molasses. The floorboards groaned under my weight, echoing through the silent room. The shadows seemed to stretch toward me, elongating unnaturally, attempting to slow my progress. The whispers became more urgent, pleading and threatening simultaneously, each word embedding fear deeper into my consciousness. In the far corner, I noticed a door I hadn't seen before, slightly ajar. Light leaked from it, warm and inviting compared to the oppressive darkness surrounding me. But as I approached, I saw the reflection in a cracked mirror beside the doorway. Behind me, figures emerged from the shadows, dozens of them, moving silently, patient, their hollow eyes fixed on me with unyielding intent. The warmth of the light was a trap. I could feel it. But my only option seemed to be to keep moving forward. I stepped into the doorway, and the room shifted instantly. It became a narrow, dimly lit corridor, the walls pulsating subtly, breathing with life. I could hear footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, and impossible to pinpoint. Every instinct screamed to run, but I had nowhere to go except forward, deeper into Maple Grove Manor's labyrinthine nightmare. The house was patient, aware, and I understood with chilling clarity that it was testing me, gauging my fear, deciding whether I would survive or become yet another whisper within its walls. I moved cautiously down the pulsating corridor, every nerve screaming that I was being watched. The walls seemed to breathe around me, expanding and contracting ever so slightly, making the space feel alive. The shadows followed my every step, stretching unnaturally and contorting into grotesque shapes that flickered at the edges of my vision. I could feel their presence pressing into my mind, testing my resolve. measuring my fear. Ahead, a faint light appeared, almost like sunlight filtering through the cracks of a boarded-up window. My heart leapt. Was it the way out? I quickened my pace, but the whispers grew louder, insistent, and somehow closer. They carried fragments of my own memories, fears, and regrets, twisting them into incomprehensible warnings. My reflection in a small, cracked mirror along the wall showed multiple shadowy forms behind me. Yet whenever I turned, there was nothing. And then I saw the final room, a grand library unlike any other part of the manor. Rows of bookshelves stretched impossibly high, filled with dusty tomes that seemed to pulse faintly as if alive. At the center, a figure sat on a high-backed chair, pale and elegant, eyes hollow yet burning with intent. It raised a hand slowly, and the whispers coalesced into a single, chilling phrase. "You cannot leave. Not yet." I realized then that Maple Grove Manor had no intention of letting me go. Escape would demand more than courage. It would demand cunning, resolve, and perhaps a willingness to confront the darkness within myself. I stepped into the library cautiously, every movement deliberate. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and decay, pressing against my lungs. Shadows stretched and writhed along the shelves, moving as if alive. The figure at the center remained perfectly still, yet I could feel its gaze burning into me, analyzing, judging, waiting. I noticed a faint pathway through the shelves, a narrow corridor that seemed to lead to a faintly glowing doorway. My instincts screamed it was a trap, but the alternative, turning back, was unthinkable. I moved forward, heart hammering, sweat trickling down my spine. The whispers followed, coalescing into a relentless chant, repeating my name over and over. At last, I reached the doorway. The shadows recoiled, the walls ceased their pulsing, and for the first time since entering the manor, the air felt lighter. I stumbled through the door, and the world outside greeted me with pale morning light. I was outside, in the overgrown garden of Maple Grove Manor. But the whispers lingered in my mind, a chilling reminder that the house had not truly let me go. I never returned to Maple Grove Manor. The experience haunted me for years, and sometimes, at night, I can still hear the faint whisper of my name, carried on the wind. The manor waits for the next intruder, patient, alive, and utterly relentless. My name is Lena Thompson, and this happened when I was 27, driving home late from a friend's house. I had taken a detour through a rural part of Ontario, a quiet back road I thought would save time. That's when I came across Hollow Creek Bridge, an old, weathered structure shrouded in fog and shadow. The locals I had spoken to earlier had avoided mentioning it, and for good reason. I would soon understand why. The bridge looked ordinary at first glance. Wooden planks worn by decades of traffic, rusted iron railings, and water below that glimmered faintly in the dim moonlight. But as I approached, a chill ran down my spine, making every hair on my body stand on end. The air around the bridge felt thick, almost viscous, and the fog that had been rolling across the road thickened abruptly, wrapping around my car like a living thing. I slowed the car and peered out, noticing strange carvings along the railings. Symbols I didn't recognize, deep and jagged, etched as if by long-forgotten hands. A sudden gust of wind made the car shiver on its tires. That's when I heard it. Faint whispers rising from beneath the bridge, low and unintelligible, but unmistakably real. I tried to rationalize it as the wind or echoes off the water. But the whispers weren't random. They formed a rhythm, a chant. My heart pounded as I realized I wasn't alone. Something was waiting on Hollow Creek Bridge, and it had noticed me. As I drove onto the bridge, the wooden planks creaked under the weight of my car, each sound echoing unnaturally in the fog. The whispers grew louder, now forming recognizable words, though their meaning eluded me. I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, that the isolation and darkness were playing tricks on my mind, but every instinct screamed otherwise. The fog thickened, curling around the tires like icy fingers, and the temperature dropped suddenly. My breath fogged the windows as I glanced over the railing at the black water below. Something moved beneath the surface. Shapes that rippled just out of focus, large and twisted, not quite human. I blinked, and they were gone. But the unease remained, pressing into my chest. Then I noticed a figure at the far end of the bridge. Tall, thin, standing perfectly still in the fog, its eyes glowing faintly. I couldn't tell if it was human or something else entirely. My pulse spiked. The car shuddered as if resisting my desire to move forward, and the whispers became frantic, circling my mind like vultures. I pressed harder on the accelerator, desperate to cross, but the bridge seemed longer than it should have been. Shadows danced along the railing, forming grotesque shapes, stretching and twisting as if alive. Hollow Creek Bridge wasn't just old. It was sentient, and it was testing me. I had entered its domain, and it had decided I belonged there. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white, as the fog seemed to thicken further, swallowing the headlights in an unnatural darkness. Every plank beneath the car groaned, each sound echoing like a scream across the water. The figure ahead remained perfectly still, its glowing eyes locked on me as if measuring my fear. The whispers swirled, faster now, forming fragmented sentences that repeated in my mind. You shouldn't be here. You belong beneath. Panic threatened to overtake me, but I forced myself to focus. The bridge felt impossibly long, stretching farther than memory allowed. Shadows along the railings writhed and shifted, forming twisted humanoid shapes. One reached toward me, just at the edge of my vision, but vanished when I turned my head. My pulse raced uncontrollably, and the chill crawling up my spine was unrelenting. I could see the far side of the bridge now, or at least I thought I could. A flickering light suggested the end was near, but the bridge warped subtly, changing shape, bending reality as if alive. I realized then that Hollow Creek Bridge didn't want me to cross. It wanted to test me, to see if I could withstand the fear it conjured. Every instinct screamed to flee, but there was nowhere to go except forward. I pressed on, gripping the wheel so tightly my fingers ached, and silently prayed that I would survive Hollow Creek's malevolent grasp. As I neared the middle of the bridge, the fog seemed to thicken into a solid wall, pressing against the car from all sides. The whispers became deafening, repeating my name over and over, mixing with laughter that was both childish and horrifyingly sinister. I could feel the bridge beneath me shifting subtly, planks stretching and contracting, sending jolts through the tires. Then I saw movement in the water below. Shapes rising, dark forms with twisted limbs that barely broke the surface yet radiated menace. I blinked, and they disappeared, replaced by the reflection of the figure ahead, now closer, moving with impossible speed. My stomach turned to ice. The bridge wasn't just haunted, it was alive, aware of my presence, feeding on my terror. I tried to speed up, but the car slowed inexplicably, as if the bridge itself resisted my escape. The glowing eyes of the figure bore into me, unblinking, unyielding. Shadows danced in the periphery, sometimes humanoid, sometimes monstrous. Every instinct screamed that hesitation meant death, or worse, eternal entrapment beneath Hollow Creek. My hands trembled as I pushed forward, whispering silent prayers to anything that might listen. The bridge loomed endlessly, each plank a test of courage, each shadow a taunt. I realized then that Hollow Creek Bridge didn't merely exist. It watched, it judged, and it consumed fear like fuel. By the time I reached the middle of the bridge, my fear had become a physical weight, pressing down on my chest and making each breath a struggle. The whispers had shifted from words to a deafening chorus, surrounding my mind and forcing images of drowning and shadows into my thoughts. Every plank beneath the tires groaned and warped, as if alive, testing my balance and resolve. I caught sight of the figure ahead, its tall, thin form perfectly still, glowing eyes burning like coals in the darkness. The shadows along the railings writhed, forming grotesque shapes. Hands reaching out, mouths opening silently, twisted bodies crouching in impossible positions. The fog swirled around me like a living entity, thickening with every meter I advanced, pressing against the car and slowing it down. I tried to accelerate, to escape, but the tires spun helplessly on the warped planks. The whispers now formed a single, chilling phrase. "You will belong to the creek." Panic surged. I gripped the wheel tighter, knowing that hesitation or fear could be fatal. Every instinct screamed that the bridge was testing me, gauging my fear, measuring whether I was worthy of crossing or doomed to become yet another lost soul beneath Hollow Creek. I pressed forward, my pulse hammering, eyes locked on the figure and the warped planks ahead. Survival depended on moving straight through, no matter how terrifying the bridge became. I fought to keep the car moving forward, heart hammering, palms slick with sweat. The fog pressed against the windshield, reducing visibility to mere meters. Shapes rose intermittently from the black water below, twisted, grotesque forms that seemed to reach for me, but never fully broke the surface. Each jolt of the tires over warped planks felt like a pulse, the bridge alive and aware of my fear. The figure ahead hadn't moved an inch, yet I could feel its attention locked on me, measuring every heartbeat, every tremor of panic. The whispers now circled my mind like predators, fragments of memories that weren't mine, loss, grief, and despair, twisting into threats I could barely comprehend. I had no idea how much of this was real and how much the bridge was manipulating my mind, but the danger felt tangible. Then, just ahead, I saw a faint glow, the exit. My pulse surged. Relief mingled with terror. The fog thinned slightly, though shadows continued to writhe along the railings, watching, waiting. I pressed the accelerator, tires skidding slightly on wet, warped wood, adrenaline propelling me forward. I realized that Hollow Creek Bridge didn't merely haunt. It tested, tormented, and claimed those who dared to enter. Every moment was a trial of will and courage, and I understood that my survival depended on keeping my focus, ignoring the whispers, and never looking away. The closer I got to the exit, the more alive the bridge felt. The warped planks beneath the tires seemed to shift, subtly bending and twisting, making the car lurch unpredictably. The whispers became deafening, circling in my mind, forming images of my worst fears, drowning, being crushed, swallowed by shadows. I forced myself to breathe steadily, gripping the wheel like my life depended on it, because it did. The glowing-eyed figure remained ahead, motionless, yet I could feel its intent pressing against me. Shadows along the bridge contorted into humanoid forms, reaching out as if to drag me into the fog. My pulse raced, but I forced myself to focus on the faint glow of the road's end. It was real. It was tangible. My only chance was to reach it. A plank cracked sharply beneath the car, jolting me forward and almost sending the vehicle into the railing. The water below churned, dark shapes rising for an instant before disappearing. Every step felt like a confrontation with a sentient, malevolent force. The bridge testing my courage, my will, and my very sanity. I whispered to myself over and over, "Keep moving. Don't stop, don't look back." Each word was a lifeline, a fragile tether to reality. Hollow Creek Bridge was alive, and it would not forgive hesitation. I pressed forward, my eyes locked on the faint light ahead, heart hammering in terror and determination. I was now 3/4 across the bridge, and the oppressive fog began to thin slightly, though the shadows clung stubbornly to the edges of my vision. The whispers had become more structured, almost mocking, repeating my name and urging me to surrender. I gritted my teeth, refusing to let fear control me. Every jolt of the car on the warped planks felt like a test of my resolve. The figure ahead didn't move, yet its gaze burned into me, pressing into my thoughts like a physical force. Shadows along the railings seemed to lean closer, reaching for me with elongated, twisted forms. I fought the urge to glance into the water below, knowing that what lurked there wanted nothing more than to see me falter. The exit light was closer now, glowing faintly through the dissipating fog. Relief battled terror inside me, each meter forward a struggle against the bridge's malevolent will. My pulse thundered in my ears as I felt the bridge resisting, each plank a subtle pushback, as if it had a mind of its own. I whispered a prayer and pressed onward, knowing that Hollow Creek Bridge was alive, aware, and determined to claim those who dared cross. Every shadow, every whisper, every warped plank was a challenge I had to survive. One misstep, one hesitation, and the creek would claim me forever. I was nearly at the end of Hollow Creek Bridge when the air shifted. The fog, once thick and suffocating, thinned just enough to reveal the warped structure in stark detail. The shadows along the railings writhed violently, their forms twisting into grotesque, humanoid shapes that reached for me with desperate urgency. The whispers had escalated into a shrill chorus, a deafening cacophony that clawed at my mind, filling me with dread and panic. The glowing-eyed figure ahead seemed to pulse with energy, as if aware of my every heartbeat. Its gaze felt like it penetrated my very soul, reading my fear and hesitation. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white as I fought to keep the car moving forward. The warped planks beneath the tires groaned loudly, echoing across the creek like cries for mercy. Dark shapes shifted in the water below, rising just enough to glimpse their twisted forms before vanishing into the depths. I forced myself not to look away from the faint light at the far end of the bridge, the only tangible hope for escape. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, to flee, to abandon reason. But I knew that Hollow Creek Bridge thrived on fear. Hesitation here was fatal. I whispered my mantra again. Keep moving. Don't stop. Don't look back. And with trembling determination, I pressed forward, each meter bringing me closer to freedom, or to the bridge's ultimate test. Finally, I crossed the last warped plank, and the fog thinned completely. The shadows retreated, melting back into the darkness along the railings. The whispers dissolved into an eerie silence, leaving only the sound of my ragged breathing and the gentle lapping of water against the bridge. The glowing-eyed figure had vanished, leaving behind a lingering sense of dread that pressed into my chest. I parked the car on the far side of the bridge and stepped out, legs trembling, heart hammering. The night air was cold, but real, tangible, and free from the unnatural weight that had clung to the bridge. I glanced back at Hollow Creek Bridge, and for a brief moment, I swore I saw the structure twist subtly, as if exhaling a slow, deliberate sigh. The carvings in the railings seemed to shimmer faintly, mocking me silently, a reminder that the bridge had not forgotten me. I drove away without looking back again. The terror of that night etched into my memory forever. Hollow Creek Bridge waited patiently for the next soul, patient, aware, and relentless. Even now, years later, when I hear the faint rushing of water on quiet nights, I shiver, wondering if it is calling for me again. Still hungry for fear, still testing, still alive. Hollow Creek Bridge had survived generations by feeding on fear, and I had lived to tell the story. My name is Ethan Clark, and this happened when I decided to go camping alone in the dense forests of Black Hollow, Ontario. I had always loved solitude, the peace of nature, and the way the wind whispered through the trees. That evening, as I pitched my tent near a small clearing, I noticed the air felt different. Thicker, colder, almost as if the forest itself was watching. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and shadows began to stretch unnaturally across the clearing. The pines swayed with a sound that was more than the wind, a faint whispering that I couldn't immediately understand. I shook my head, telling myself it was my imagination, nerves playing tricks after a long day of hiking. But as darkness enveloped the forest, the whispers grew louder, coalescing into faint words, indecipherable yet unmistakably human. I tried to ignore it and started a small fire, hoping the light and warmth would drive away my unease. But the whispers didn't fade. They circled my mind as if carried on the wind, moving with intent. The shadows between the trees deepened, stretching toward me like elongated fingers. Then I heard footsteps. Not mine, not the rustle of animals, but deliberate, slow, approaching my campsite from the tree line. My pulse quickened. I wasn't alone. Something, or someone, was moving through the whispering pines, and it had noticed me. The footsteps grew louder, crunching softly over the pine needles, but never close enough to reveal their source. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to rationalize what I was hearing. It had to be an animal, maybe a deer or a fox. Yet, the rhythm was too deliberate, too purposeful, like someone circling me, studying me. I grabbed a flashlight and swept its beam across the tree line. The shadows danced, twisting between the trees, yet nothing concrete emerged. Just as I was about to convince myself that fear was playing tricks, a whisper rose above the others. A single word, drawn out and chilling. Leave. I froze, the flashlight trembling in my hands. The forest seemed to respond to that word. The wind ceased, the fire dimmed, and even the chirping of distant crickets fell silent. The whisper wasn't carried by the wind anymore. It echoed in my mind, clear, deliberate, a warning I could not ignore. I backed toward my car, trying to remain calm, but the whispers multiplied, circling me, overlapping, forming phrases that weren't mine. You don't belong. This is ours. Join us. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet the forest felt alive, watching, patient, and aware of my every move. It became clear that Black Hollow wasn't just haunted by tales, it was inhabited by something ancient, intelligent, and hungry for fear. And I had stumbled into its domain. I fumbled with the keys to my car, my hands trembling so badly that it took multiple tries to unlock the doors. The whispers swirled louder around me, a chaotic chorus of indistinguishable voices that seemed to echo my own thoughts back at me. Each step I took toward the vehicle was measured and slow, my senses on high alert. The forest itself seemed to lean closer, the pines creaking in ways that mimicked voices, creating the illusion of figures just beyond the edge of vision. When I finally reached the driver's seat, I dared to glance back. Shadows flickered between the trees, moving with impossible speed, sometimes disappearing and sometimes closer than I thought possible. The whispers were no longer confined to the forest. They had entered my mind, layering fear upon fear, fragmenting my sense of reality. I started the car, the headlights cutting through the mist and revealing brief glimpses of elongated shadows that seemed to retreat only to follow again. The forest's oppressive presence was relentless, as if it was aware of my plan to escape. The whispers repeated, now in perfect unison, "You cannot leave. You cannot leave." My pulse pounded in my ears as I slowly drove out of the clearing. Every tree looked alive, every shadow a sentinel, and I realized with growing terror that the whispering pines were not merely haunted. They were a sentient trap, patient and unyielding. I drove slowly along the narrow forest path, the fog wrapping around the vehicle like a suffocating blanket. Every glance into the rearview mirror revealed nothing, yet the sensation of being watched never left. The whispers continued, soft at first, then growing insistent, circling my mind with fragments of words and images that were deeply personal, evoking long-forgotten fears and regrets. The shadows outside shifted unnaturally, elongated forms flickering between the trees, sometimes seemingly merging with the fog itself. My headlights revealed glimpses of pale, humanoid shapes, always just at the edge of visibility. The forest seemed to close in, the road bending unnaturally, stretching farther than it should have, as if to prolong my torment. I tried to focus on the exit signs I thought I knew, the landmarks from the map I had studied earlier. But the whispering pines seemed to resist navigation, each tree a sentinel, each shadow a warning. I realized then that leaving would not be a simple matter of driving away. The forest demanded my submission. The wind began to howl, carrying the whispers in a chorus that was deafening in its intensity. My heart raced as I realized that escape was possible only if I maintained absolute calm, resisting the forest's psychic assault. One mistake, one falter, and I would be trapped forever in the blackened embrace of Black Hollow. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the road became uneven, roots lifting the asphalt like veins on a corpse. The whispers intensified, no longer distant, now coming from directly beside me, inside me. Each voice carried a fragment of my life, a mistake, a memory I had buried, a fear I had never confronted. The forest had found a way to pierce my mind, turning it into a labyrinth of terror. The headlights flickered, revealing figures just outside the beam. Pale, emaciated, humanoid forms that seemed to merge with the fog, swaying in perfect synchronization as if performing some ritual only the forest understood. I slammed my hands on the wheel, forcing the car forward, every nerve screaming that stopping, even for a second, would mean certain death. I realized the forest wasn't just haunted, it was intelligent, alive, and actively manipulating my perception. The trees seemed to shift when I blinked, rearranging themselves, elongating, or closing in to obscure my path. Every glance over my shoulder revealed a shadow that should not exist, moving closer with impossible speed, always just out of reach. I whispered prayers under my breath, gripping the steering wheel with trembling hands, eyes fixed on the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy ahead. Survival demanded focus, courage, and a willingness to resist the forest's psychic assault. Every shadow, every whisper, every twisted branch was a test, and I had no choice but to endure. The path grew narrower, and the trees pressed closer to the car, their branches scraping the sides like skeletal fingers. The whispers had become a chorus, repeating my name over and over, blending with indistinct laughter and distorted cries. My pulse pounded, each heartbeat amplifying the forest's oppressive presence. A shadow moved across the path ahead, too swift to be human. I slammed the brakes, heart hammering, headlights catching a figure that seemed to stretch impossibly, its limbs bending at angles that defied nature. The whispers shifted, now forming threats, suggestions, and warnings in a voice that felt both alien and intimately familiar. "You cannot leave. You belong here." I forced myself to start the car again, keeping my eyes forward, trying to ignore the shapes darting at the edges of my vision. Every meter was a battle against fear, against the forest's conscious manipulation. The road twisted unnaturally, sometimes disappearing entirely beneath the fog. Yet I pressed on, knowing that hesitation would be fatal. Through the swaying pines, I glimpsed a faint patch of moonlight, a sign that the forest's edge might be near. But the whispering pines were relentless. Even as I neared the light, shadows clung to the periphery, whispering, watching, feeding on my terror. Survival meant maintaining courage, resisting the whispers, and not faltering, even when every instinct begged me to surrender. The moonlight ahead glimmered through the thick canopy, signaling that the forest's edge was close. But the whispering pines were relentless, and I could feel their presence pressing in from all sides. Shadows flickered between the trunks, elongated and impossible, always at the edge of my vision. The whispers now formed sentences, cruel and mocking. "You will never leave. This is ours. Join us." I gritted my teeth, gripping the steering wheel tightly, forcing myself to focus on the faint path ahead. Every jolt of the tires over unseen roots felt like a punishment, a test of my resolve. The forest was aware of my fear, measuring it, toying with it, and using it to prolong my torment. I dared not glance to the side, knowing that what lurked there was far beyond comprehension. Suddenly, a figure darted across the path, swift and distorted, its eyes gleaming faintly in the moonlight. I swerved slightly, heart racing, but pressed onward. Every shadow, every whisper, and every warped branch was a challenge to my courage. The forest seemed to be a living entity, reshaping itself as I moved, prolonging my journey, determined to trap me forever. I whispered a silent prayer and forced the car forward, knowing that escape depended on keeping calm and moving relentlessly. The forest might bend reality, distort perception, and toy with fear. But as long as I didn't falter, there was hope. I could see the first signs of the forest thinning. The trees spaced wider, moonlight growing stronger, the oppressive weight of the fog slightly lifting. Yet the whispering pines had one last trial. Shadows twisted unnaturally along the edge of the road, forming humanoid shapes that lunged forward when I blinked and retreated when I focused directly on them. The whispers continued, now almost conversational, teasing me, probing my weaknesses, whispering secrets only I would know. Regrets, fears, memories I had long tried to bury. Each word cut deeper than the cold, damp night air. But I forced myself to ignore them, eyes locked on the faint glimmer of open sky ahead. The car rattled over hidden roots, and I could feel the tension in the forest increase, as if sensing my determination to leave. The shadows writhed with frustration, and the whispers became desperate, almost pleading, as if the forest itself was alive and aware of my will to survive. With each meter closer to freedom, my pulse pounded harder, my hands gripped the wheel tighter, and my mind focused entirely on escape. The forest seemed to bend and shift with intent, but I refused to falter. I understood now that the whispering pines of Black Hollow were more than trees. They were sentient, ancient, and relentless. But my determination was stronger than their power. At least for now. The edge of the forest was almost in sight. A faint glow of open land breaking through the dense canopy. My heart raced, every nerve screaming that freedom was near. Yet the whispering pines were relentless until the very last moment. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the road, forming grotesque, humanoid shapes that vanished when I tried to focus on them directly. The whispers circled my mind, a relentless chorus of fragmented sentences, taunting me, threatening me, probing for a moment of weakness. A sudden movement in the corner of my eye made me swerve slightly. A figure darted from the fog, elongated and inhuman, its pale form flickering like a ghostly reflection in the moonlight. I slammed on the accelerator, tires skidding over hidden roots, but the forest seemed to resist my escape, subtly shifting to obscure my path. Each meter forward was a battle against both the forest's physical obstacles and its psychic assault. The air felt thick and alive, each breath a struggle, as if the whispering pines could sense my fear and feed upon it. I forced myself to keep moving, ignoring the shadows, ignoring the whispers, focusing solely on the light ahead. Survival was not guaranteed, but hesitation would mean being claimed forever by the ancient, sentient woods. I whispered a prayer under my breath, heart pounding, and drove onward with every ounce of courage I had left. Finally, the trees gave way, revealing open ground bathed in pale moonlight. The oppressive fog lifted almost completely, and the shadows that had haunted every corner of the forest receded. The whispers dissolved into silence, leaving only the sound of my ragged breathing and the distant rustle of the wind. I had escaped, or so I thought. I parked the car at the edge of the clearing, legs trembling, heart hammering, and looked back. The forest stood silent, seemingly ordinary. Yet I could feel its watchful presence even from the distance. It was patient, intelligent, and unyielding, a living entity that thrived on fear. The whispering pines had tested me, pushing me to the brink, and now it would wait for the next intruder, patient and relentless. Even as I drove away, the memories of the whispers and shadows clung to my mind. On quiet nights, I still hear fragments of their voices in the wind, and I shiver, knowing that Black Hollow is alive, waiting and never truly forgiving. I survived that night, but I am forever changed, and the forest will always be a presence in my memory, watching, whispering, and waiting. I will never return. Yet I cannot escape the knowledge that the whispering pines will always be there, patient, sentient, and hungry for fear. My name is Clara Dawson, and this happened when I took a job caring for an old farmhouse in rural Ontario. Red Maple Farm had been abandoned for years, its reputation whispered about in nearby towns. Locals spoke of strange lights, voices in the night, and disappearances that no one could explain. I was skeptical at first, thinking the stories were just folklore designed to scare tourists and trespassers. The first night, as I settled into the farmhouse, I noticed an oppressive stillness. The wind outside the broken windows carried strange, hollow echoes, as if the house itself were breathing. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the wooden floors, elongating and twisting in ways that seemed impossible. I tried to ignore them, chalking it up to my imagination, but a creeping sense of unease settled over me. By midnight, I began hearing faint whispers coming from the walls, unintelligible at first, but clearly deliberate. The floorboards creaked as if someone, or something, was walking just beyond my room. I called out, but no response came. Only the whispering continued, circling my mind like an insidious chant. From the first moment, I realized that Red Maple Farm was not just abandoned, it was alive in a way I could not comprehend. The house had a presence, a sentience that seemed to watch, listen, and judge me. And I, foolishly, had entered its domain alone. I tried to convince myself that the whispers were just the wind passing through the gaps in the old farmhouse. But the feeling of being watched was undeniable. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me, twisting unnaturally as I moved from room to room. The air felt thick and heavy, carrying a faint metallic scent that made my stomach churn. As I explored the kitchen, I noticed the old cupboards rattling slightly, though no breeze entered the room. A cold draft brushed past my neck, and I froze, the hairs on my arms standing on end. The whispers grew louder, and I could swear I heard my name being called, drawn out and mournful. The floorboards groaned under my feet, as if the house itself were alive, protesting my presence. Determined to understand what was happening, I set up candles and notebooks, hoping to document any strange occurrences. I began hearing soft footsteps pacing above me in the attic, even though I was the only person in the house. Each creak of the floorboards, each whisper in the walls, made my pulse race, and I realized that Red Maple Farm had its own rhythm, its own consciousness, and it was aware of me. By midnight, I understood the terrifying truth. The farmhouse wasn't just haunted, it was sentient, and my presence had awakened something ancient that had been waiting patiently for someone foolish enough to enter its halls. The next morning, I woke to an oppressive silence that was far heavier than the whispers of the previous night. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the grime-coated windows, casting dim, fractured light across the cracked wooden floors. I tried to convince myself it was just an old house settling, yet every instinct screamed otherwise. The farmhouse had a presence, patient and malevolent, and it was impossible to ignore. I ventured into the living room, where the old fireplace stood cold and lifeless. Shadows pooled unnaturally along the walls, clinging to corners as if hiding from the light. I noticed scratches along the floorboards, jagged and deep, forming patterns that seemed intentional. My pulse quickened. It was as if the house had moved while I slept, marking me, warning me. As I prepared breakfast, I caught movement in the corner of my eye, a fleeting silhouette near the staircase. My breath caught. I turned, but the figure vanished, leaving only the faint echo of footsteps above, pacing relentlessly in the attic. The house's whispers returned, soft, deliberate, coaxing, forming fragments of words I couldn't fully understand. By evening, I realized that Red Maple Farm wasn't just haunted. It was aware of my thoughts, my fears, and my weaknesses. Every creak, every groan, every flicker of shadow felt like a test, designed to erode my sanity and break my resolve. I understood then that surviving the night would require courage, patience, and a willingness to face the inexplicable. That evening, the house's oppressive presence intensified. Shadows shifted with deliberate purpose, stretching across rooms in ways that defied natural light. The whispers became clearer, almost articulate, forming short phrases that taunted me. "You shouldn't be here. You don't belong. Stay forever." My heart pounded as I realized that the farmhouse wasn't merely haunted. It was sentient and malevolent, capable of manipulating both my perception and the physical world around me. I attempted to lock myself in my bedroom, but the doorknob rattled violently, as though something, or someone, was testing my resolve. The floorboards beneath me groaned and shifted with each breath I took, echoing through the empty halls. I caught sight of a figure at the far end of the corridor, pale, thin, and almost indistinct, yet unmistakably human in form. I froze, my instincts screaming to run, but my legs refused to move. The whispers swirled into a chorus, overlapping with the creaking floorboards and distant thuds from the attic. The house seemed to respond to my fear, amplifying it, bending the environment around me. I realized that leaving would not be simple. Red Maple Farm had claimed its space, and my presence had awakened something ancient and hungry. I clenched my fists and whispered prayers, forcing my mind to focus, knowing that the coming hours would test every ounce of courage I possessed. The farmhouse had plans for me, and survival meant confronting them. By the 5th hour of nightfall, I had begun to understand the rhythm of Red Maple Farm. The house seemed to breathe, its creaks and groans forming a pulse that matched my own heartbeat. Every shadow shifted as if it were aware of me, twisting and stretching in impossible angles. I could hear whispers through the walls, sometimes calling my name, sometimes warning, sometimes mocking, each one more insistent than the last. I moved cautiously through the kitchen, flashlight trembling in my hands. The cupboards rattled, and faint scratch marks appeared along the walls, though I had seen nothing. Every step I took felt like a negotiation with the house itself. A silent agreement that I would survive this night, only if I respected its power. Then, from the corner of the room, I glimpsed a figure. A woman, pale and emaciated, with hollow eyes that bore into my soul. She stood perfectly still. Yet I could sense her awareness, her intelligence, as if she were both part of the house and an independent entity with a will of her own. The whispers shifted, now clearly interacting with her, forming a dialogue I could not fully understand, but felt deeply. I forced myself to breathe slowly, trying to maintain my composure. Red Maple Farm was alive, sentient, and it was testing me. Every shadow, every whisper, every sound was a message, a puzzle, and possibly a trap. Survival depended not on fleeing, but on understanding the rules of the house, and I was only beginning to learn them. As the night deepened, I discovered that the farmhouse thrived on fear. Every sound I made, every cautious step I took, seemed amplified, feeding the house's malevolent energy. The whispering grew insistent, overlapping into unintelligible phrases. Yet I could feel their intent. To frighten, to weaken, to dominate. My thoughts were no longer private. The house seemed to know them before I did. I ventured into the attic, drawn by a mixture of fear and curiosity. The air was colder there, heavier, and the shadows darker, almost solid. The whispers crescendoed into a chant, echoing through the beams and rafters, forming patterns that seemed deliberate. I glimpsed faint outlines of figures, humanoid yet grotesque, moving in the periphery of my vision. I froze, heart hammering, as one figure stepped into the weak moonlight, filtering through the broken roof. Its face was featureless, pale, yet I could sense intelligence behind its gaze, a consciousness that mirrored the house itself. I realized then that the entire building was not just haunted. It was alive, aware, and patient, waiting for me to falter. I retreated slowly, trying to remember every step I had taken, every shadow I had seen. Red Maple Farm was a predator, ancient and patient. My survival depended entirely on my ability to navigate its sentient corridors without succumbing to terror. The hours crept by like slow-moving shadows, each moment testing my resolve. The farmhouse seemed to anticipate my every movement, responding with creaks, whispers, and shadows that slithered along the walls and floorboards. Every time I thought I understood the rhythm, it shifted, bending perception and twisting reality. The sense of being watched was inescapable, and I felt eyes, countless, unseen, intelligent, tracking my every heartbeat. I moved toward the bedroom, hoping to find a place of temporary sanctuary. The air grew colder, the shadows longer, and the whispers louder, forming full sentences now. You cannot hide. You cannot rest. This is ours. My skin crawled as I realized that the house was aware not only of my body, but of my mind. Every memory, every fear, every doubt was being used against me. Then I saw her again, the pale, hollow-eyed figure, emerging slowly from the corner of the room. She moved with deliberate, unnerving precision, her gaze fixed entirely on me. The whispers shifted, guiding her movements, or perhaps she guided them. My pulse raced, yet I forced myself to breathe steadily, knowing that panic would give the house its victory. Red Maple Farm was a living, sentient predator. Its patience was infinite, its intent unyielding, and every shadow, every sound, every whisper was a calculated move in a game of survival. I had to remain focused, calm, and vigilant. Any lapse could be fatal. I decided to confront the house in a way I hadn't before. I lit candles along the main hallway, hoping the light would push back the shadows and break the rhythm of whispers. Yet, as I did, the darkness responded, stretching toward the flames, elongating, and forming grotesque silhouettes that seemed almost alive. The whispers turned frantic, overlapping, echoing as if angered by my defiance. The pale figure appeared again, gliding silently among the shadows, its presence both terrifying and mesmerizing. The whispers seemed to direct it, forming a strange, almost ritualistic dance that I could barely comprehend. Each movement, each gesture, seemed designed to unnerve me, to test my courage. I realized that Red Maple Farm didn't just haunt. It studied, it manipulated, and it waited patiently for me to make a mistake. I had to understand its rules to survive. Every creak, every groan, every flicker of shadow was a warning and a test. I forced my mind to remain steady, focusing on the flame of each candle and on my own heartbeat, refusing to let fear take over. By the end of the night, I had gained a fragile understanding. The farmhouse thrived on terror, but respected determination. To survive, I had to remain resolute, alert, and unwilling to surrender to the sentient darkness that haunted every corner. As dawn approached, the house seemed to sense that its dominance over me was waning. Shadows still clung to corners, shifting unnaturally, but their intensity had lessened, as if the night had expended most of its power. The whispers persisted, but now they were fragmented, almost reluctant, as if acknowledging my endurance. Every creak, every groan, every flicker of movement felt like a final test. I moved cautiously through the rooms, my flashlight scanning every corner. The pale figure appeared one last time, standing silently at the edge of the hallway, its hollow eyes following me with unblinking focus. I forced myself to meet its gaze, refusing to show fear, and slowly, it receded into the shadows, almost as if respecting my resilience. The farmhouse itself seemed to sigh, a subtle creaking that resonated through the wooden beams, as though it acknowledged my survival. Yet I knew this was temporary. Red Maple Farm was patient, ancient, and sentient. It would wait, bide its time, and seek out the next soul foolish enough to enter its domain. Even as I packed my things, I could feel the house's watchful presence, silent but persistent. The air was lighter than the previous nights, but an unshakable awareness lingered, reminding me that my ordeal had been no accident. I had survived, but the memory of every shadow, every whisper and every haunting gaze would remain with me forever. Finally, I stepped outside into the pale morning light. The oppressive weight that had filled the house for nights on end lifted slightly, but I could still feel its presence, lingering like a shadow in my mind. Red Maple Farm stood silent and imposing, ordinary in appearance, but hiding a consciousness that no one could see and few could survive. As I looked back at the house one last time, I realized the truth. It was alive, sentient, and patient. The whispers, the shadows, the pale figures. They were all manifestations of a malevolent intelligence that had endured for decades, feeding on fear and curiosity. I had escaped, but I could never forget the sensation of being observed, manipulated, and hunted by the very walls around me. Even now, months later, I hear faint echoes of those whispers in the wind, glimpses of shadows in peripheral vision, and a cold chill that reminds me of that sentient presence. Red Maple Farm had marked me, and its memory is permanently etched into my mind. I left that farmhouse knowing one undeniable fact. Sentient darkness exists, and it waits patiently for the next unsuspecting soul. I survived, but Red Maple Farm's hunger continues, eternal and unyielding, and I am forever haunted by what I encountered within its walls. My name is Ethan Marshall, and this happened during the harshest winter I've ever experienced in northern Ontario. Frostbite Creek had long been a place whispered about in nearby towns. A creek that seemed ordinary by day, but held an ominous presence at night. People claimed the waters ran black after sundown, and shadows along the banks were not always cast by trees. Skeptical, I decided to camp nearby, thinking it was the perfect opportunity to test my survival skills in extreme cold. From the moment I set up my tent, a strange sensation settled over the area. The forest around Frostbite Creek was silent in a way that was unnatural. No rustling leaves, no distant wildlife, only a heavy, expectant stillness. The temperatures seemed to drop sharply, despite the fire I had built. Shadows stretched across the snow like living things, twisting with the wind, forming shapes that vanished when I looked directly at them. By nightfall, whispers began. Faint, almost inaudible at first. They grew in intensity, drifting over the icy water and curling around my tent. They were words I could not understand, yet they carried a sense of deliberate intent. Something was out there, observing, waiting, calculating. From the black waters of the creek to the skeletal trees lining the banks, I realized that Frostbite Creek was far from ordinary. It was alive, patient, and malevolent, and I had unknowingly entered its domain. As the night deepened, the whispers grew louder, wrapping around my mind like icy fingers. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind echoing through the skeletal trees, but every instinct screamed otherwise. The forest around Frostbite Creek felt alive, each tree and shadow pulsating with a consciousness I could not comprehend. My fire flickered violently, casting long, shifting shadows across the snow, and I could have sworn some of them moved independently of the flames. I unzipped my tent cautiously, trying to get a better view of the creek. The water's surface shimmered unnaturally, black ripples forming patterns that seemed deliberate, as if something beneath was studying me. A chill ran down my spine as I realized I wasn't alone. The silhouettes of figures, tall, thin, almost featureless, moved along the tree line, vanishing whenever I tried to focus on them directly. Every instinct screamed to run, but the snow and cold made escape slow and dangerous. The whispers shifted, forming unintelligible words, yet I could feel their intent, warning me, mocking me, testing me. Frostbite Creek was not just a location, it was an entity, patient, sentient, and hungry for fear. I huddled closer to the fire, knowing that the longer I stayed, the more aware the creek and its shadows became. Survival depended on remaining calm, alert, and willing to confront the incomprehensible presence that was patiently circling me in the freezing night. Hours passed slowly, each one heavier than the last. The shadows at the edge of the creek grew bolder, inching closer with every flicker of my fire. Their movements were deliberate, almost intelligent, as if they were testing my courage, observing my fear, measuring my resolve. The cold bit deeper into my skin, but it wasn't the winter that frightened me. It was the sense that the creek itself was alive, patient, and calculating. I stood, trying to get a better look, but the figures melted into the darkness whenever I raised my gaze. The whispers swirled around me like a storm, some phrases almost intelligible. "You shouldn't be here. This belongs to us. Leave." I shivered violently, feeling my mind strain under the relentless pressure of being watched. The shadows seemed to react to my fear, stretching taller, curling closer, their forms flickering like smoke in the wind. In a desperate attempt to maintain control, I focused on my breathing, grounding myself in the fire's warmth. Each crack of the wood was like a heartbeat echoing through the forest, a reminder that I was still alive, still standing, still defying whatever haunted the creek. I realized that the longer I remained, the more aware the creek became of me, and any misstep could be catastrophic. By midnight, it was clear. Frostbite Creek was no ordinary place. It was sentient, ancient, and malevolent, and I was now ensnared in its silent, relentless game. The night seemed to stretch endlessly, each moment dragging with an oppressive weight. I heard twigs snapping near the edge of the creek, though I saw nothing. The shadows were bolder now, forming shapes that mimicked human movement, swaying slowly as if communicating with one another. The whispers had turned urgent, overlapping in a cacophony that made it impossible to focus on a single thought. I decided to leave the safety of the firelight and edge closer to the creek, desperate to understand the source of this malevolence. Each step was a negotiation with the icy snow and the looming darkness, which seemed almost physical, pressing against me from all sides. As I approached the black water, I caught a reflection, not my own, but that of a pale, distorted face peering from beneath the surface. My heart stopped. The whispers intensified, as if responding to my shock, echoing across the trees and snow, forming phrases that chilled me to the bone. "We see you. We know you. You cannot leave." The realization hit me like ice water. Frostbite Creek wasn't just haunted. It was alive, aware, and malevolent. The shadows, the water, the whispers, they were all extensions of a single, calculating consciousness. I stumbled backward, gripping my flashlight like a weapon, knowing that the creek's patience was infinite, and my survival depended on navigating the night without succumbing to panic or despair. The cold seemed to seep into my bones as I huddled near the fire, trying to ignore the increasingly bold movements of the shadows along the creek. They no longer stayed at the edge, but crept closer with deliberate, almost sentient intent, stretching and curling like smoke over the snow. Every snap of a twig or crack of ice sounded amplified, echoing through the forest as if mocking my fear. I realized that Frostbite Creek had a rhythm, a heartbeat that synchronized with the movements of the shadows. The whispers were no longer random. They had a cadence, almost like a language I couldn't fully comprehend. I could feel their intent pressing against my mind, probing my thoughts, anticipating my reactions. Survival no longer depended on speed. It depended on understanding, patience, and unwavering composure. With trembling hands, I decided to document what I was seeing and hearing. Every shadow, Every whisper, every movement of the black water seemed calculated. It was as if the creek was studying me, analyzing my weaknesses, determining how to break my will. Each figure glimpsed among the trees, tall, thin, featureless, seemed part of the creek itself, sentient extensions of its malevolent presence. By the fifth hour of darkness, I understood the terrifying reality. Frostbite Creek was alive, patient, and malevolent. It would not act recklessly. It would wait, and it would consume those who faltered. I had to endure, stay vigilant, and hope that the night would eventually release me from its silent, suffocating grip. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I decided to approach the black waters more closely. Each step was agonizingly slow, my boots crunching against the icy snow, echoing unnaturally in the oppressive silence. The shadows twisted and stretched around me, reacting to my presence, moving with a purpose that was impossible to ignore. As I neared the creek, I glimpsed movement beneath the black water, shapes that were neither fish nor animal, but something humanoid, gliding just below the surface. A shiver ran through me as whispers escalated into a cacophony, overlapping voices urging me away while simultaneously drawing me closer. It felt as though the creek itself was beckoning me, testing whether I had the courage or foolishness to face it directly. The skeletal trees seemed to bend toward me, their branches clawing at the moonlight, forming grotesque silhouettes that danced across the snow. I realized the creek's consciousness extended beyond the water, into every shadow, every sound, every shift of wind. I could sense the intent behind the movements, deliberate and patient, observing every tremor of fear in my body. I retreated slightly, my mind racing to comprehend the scale of the malevolence surrounding me. Frostbite Creek was no ordinary place. It was an intelligent, ancient predator, calculating and insatiable. My survival depended on careful movement, quiet resolve, and resisting the instinct to flee blindly into its waiting shadows. The night deepened, bringing with it a suffocating stillness that pressed against my mind like a living weight. Every shadow along the banks of Frostbite Creek seemed to thicken, stretching unnaturally toward me, while the whispers morphed into a chilling chorus, repeating fragments of words that sent shivers down my spine. You cannot leave. This belongs to us. Forever. I realized that the creek was not just watching. It was aware, calculating, and malevolent. I inched closer to the water, desperate to understand the source of the unnatural presence. The black surface shimmered with shapes that appeared humanoid, yet distorted, as if reflected through some warped lens of reality. One shadow moved independently of the others, stepping closer to the edge and bending its form toward me, challenging my resolve. Panic threatened to overtake me, but I forced calm, focusing on each breath, grounding myself in the sound of the wind and the faint crackle of my fire. As I studied the shadows, I understood a horrifying truth. Frostbite Creek was not merely haunted, it was sentient. It observed, it manipulated, and it tested. The forest, the water, the air itself were all instruments of its will. Each movement, each whisper, each distortion of reality was deliberate, designed to push me toward fear and ultimately, submission. My survival depended on vigilance, courage, and the patience to endure its relentless psychological assault. The hours dragged, and exhaustion began to claw at my mind and body. My fire burned low, casting feeble light that barely pushed back the thick, crawling darkness. The shadows moved with increasing boldness, swaying and twisting across the snow, their forms sometimes appearing as human, sometimes utterly alien. I felt the creek's awareness, a silent intelligence pressing against my thoughts. probing for weakness. I tried to remain still, whispering reassurances to myself. But the whispers around me grew louder, overlapping and forming rhythms that echoed in my chest. Shapes moved beneath the black water, undulating slowly, seemingly responding to the cadence of the voices. The skeletal trees shook in the wind, or perhaps from some unseen force, casting grotesque moving patterns across the snow. I realized that Frostbite Creek was testing me, pushing me to fear, to panic, to run blindly into its shadows. It thrived on psychological torment as much as physical danger. Every instinct screamed to leave, but fleeing recklessly would be a mistake. I had to endure, to observe, and to navigate the night with cautious resolve, understanding that the creek's sentience extended beyond the water, into every shadow, every whisper, every movement around me. By the 8th hour, I knew one thing with certainty. Frostbite Creek would not act hastily, but it was patient, intelligent, and unyielding. My survival depended entirely on respect, awareness, and the ability to endure its malevolent presence. As dawn approached, the oppressive darkness began to waver, but the shadows still clung stubbornly to the edges of Frostbite Creek. The whispers faded into murmurs, yet the awareness, the intelligence behind them remained, silent and calculating. Every movement I made was tracked, every breath noted, as if the creek itself could measure my fear and endurance. I stepped cautiously closer to the black water, seeing the distorted humanoid shapes moving beneath the surface, their forms almost liquid, flowing with a purpose I could not understand. The skeletal trees loomed over the creek, casting long, jagged shadows that intertwined with the figures below. I realized that the creek's sentience extended far beyond the water. It manipulated everything in its domain. The air, the shadows, even the snow under my boots. Despite the terrifying awareness pressing against my mind, I forced myself to breathe steadily, to move deliberately, and to remain calm. Panic would give the creek the advantage, and I could not afford to surrender. With each passing minute, the dawn grew lighter, but the sense of being observed did not fade. Frostbite Creek was patient, ancient, and malevolent, a predator of both mind and body. I understood that survival required endurance, comprehension, and respect for the entity that inhabited this place. Even as the first rays of sunlight touched the snow, the creek remained a calculating presence. Silently judging, waiting for the next moment, I faltered. Finally, the first full light of morning broke across Frostbite Creek, revealing the stark winter landscape in pale hues. The oppressive weight of the night lifted slightly, yet the intelligence that had haunted me remained, a silent, observing presence that could not be shaken. The shadows that had terrorized me retreated gradually into the skeletal trees, but their awareness lingered like a cold draft along my spine. Looking back at the creek, I realized the terrifying truth. It was alive, sentient, and ancient, feeding not only on the cold and darkness, but also on fear and curiosity. The distorted figures in the water, the whispering voices, and the twisting shadows had all been manifestations of a single consciousness, patient and malevolent. I had survived, but the experience had left an indelible mark on my mind. Even now, weeks later, I catch glimpses of shadows in peripheral vision, hear faint whispers in the wind, and feel a cold pressure that reminds me of that night. Frostbite Creek had observed, tested, and almost claimed me. My escape was not a triumph. It was temporary, a reprieve granted by patience and caution. I left knowing one unshakable truth. Some places are alive, patient, and eternal in their hunger. Frostbite Creek is one of them, and anyone who dares to wander too close will be tested by the sentient shadows that lurk within its domain.